So Donald Trump recently has downplayed concerns over white supremacy. Since this weekend's mass shootings, he said that he's against white supremacy and all other supremacies because there's so many and they're all equal these days. And that's terrible, obviously, and we know that previously, after white supremacists have committed terror attacks, he's downplayed the significance of the threat, either in the US or internationally. And it seems like, man, these are some real gaffes, or maybe he's a real dick, but it's worse than that. It's a sort of concerted effort going back literally years to disarm the US government against dealing with what they acknowledge is the biggest terror threat coming our way. So we want to show you some details. This is coming from a senior Trump administration source. Get a load of this. Homeland Security officials battled the White House for more than a year to get them to focus more on domestic terrorism. The White House wanted to focus only on the jihadist threat, which, while serious, ignored the reality that racial supremacist violence was rising fast here at home. They had major ideological blinders on. So this is a source from deep within the Trump administration saying, by the way, this is a conservative, this is a Republican who also thinks that jihadists are one of the principal threats that we face domestically. So understand this is not some leftist or anything, but this source was there to see this battle play out, and we've got some specifics for you. So to give you an idea of, I alluded to some of the past times that he's sort of played both sides or helped to, I guess, obfuscate the threat. One of the worst examples was in March of this year, right after the slaughter of 51 Muslims in New Zealand. Trump said he didn't think white nationalism was a rising threat around the world. I don't really, he said. I think it's a small group of people that have very, very serious problems. And imagine that after any other terror attack, that the president would come out and say, you guys are taking this way too seriously. It's, yeah, sure, 51 people died, but a small group of people. You can't even fill a football stadium with them, as Tucker Carlson would say. And so here's some more of how that's played out inside of the US government. The former senior administration official noted that the White House, specifically the president, has a problem criticizing white supremacy and says he, quote, didn't have expectation they would get behind it. Now, this is a reference to a brief mention of domestic terrorism as a threat in the National Counterterrorism Strategy. Quote, because the preponderance of it involves white supremacy. And that's not something this administration is comfortable speaking out against until the other day by the president, and even that was pretty hedged. So that was referring to the milquetoast teleprompter comments that Trump had clearly not read and his heart wasn't in it. So this is a guy who worked for Trump on these issues. Career is around dealing with terrorism and says, we can't get even a brief acknowledgement of this threat in official documentation, even though our intelligence services are acknowledging that this is a serious problem, because Donald Trump is uncomfortable criticizing white supremacy. And so before we press on, for any of you non-hardcore leftists who are watching this, just really, think for a second about what that means. I'm not saying Trump is a white supremacist. I mean, I do all the time, but I'm not right now, because I know that you don't think that, and you don't think that he identifies that way. But you have to start to wonder, it's obviously a thing. This guy in El Paso clearly was a white supremacist, and so why can't Trump, who's not a white supremacist in your eyes, feel comfortable criticizing a mass murderer who doesn't share his ideology? Isn't that a little bit weird? Isn't that strange? Like if some Green New Deal activist or whatever said, you know what, the threat of climate change is so seriously that it's so serious, the only way we're going to do something about it is if we take drastic action, and so I'm going to start murdering the CEOs of fossil fuel companies. And then this person went and killed a bunch of them. Now, I am not that sort of environmentalist, right? But wouldn't it be weird if I felt uncomfortable criticizing them? If I were like, well, let's just not talk about it. Let's talk about other sorts of threats against CEOs. Wouldn't you start to wonder why exactly that is and start to question my belief that I don't associate with that person? Would it really convince you? But anyway, this is not just a thing about Trump, and it's not just a thing about criticizing this particular terrorist threat. As important as that is, it actually goes deeper than that. Before we get to how money has been allocated and not allocated based on this bias, take a look at this insane sentence. So during a lengthy back and forth, the senior source tells CNN, one White House official proposed that the National Counterterrorism Strategy focus on radical Islamists and foreign drug dealers. There's a mistake in the original quote, that's not us. Since that would please the president. So, okay, look. This is just one source, and it's an anonymous source, so take that as you will. But that person acknowledges that our official terrorism documentation that is used both within the government and is also read outside of the government should be designed to please the president, not to safeguard the country, not to represent an honest critique of the threats that we face and a serious response that's up to the task of facing that threat, to please the president. Because he gets uncomfortable when you talk about white supremacy. He doesn't like criticizing it. He doesn't even like when other people criticize it. He doesn't even like when other people criticize it just within the confines of a document that he himself is never going to read. How bothered by something do you have to be to have the actual content of that report written to avoid that? And the issue, of course, is that this is not just about acknowledging the threat, as serious as it is. It's not just about not talking about the threat, as serious as that is. Take a look at this from Parker Malloy, highlighting a couple of the important points there. So on May 10th of 2017, giving an idea of how far back this goes, the DHS and the FBI issued a memo titled "White Supremacist Extremism Poses Persistent Threat of Lethal Violence." So this is back when they actually could write documents like that. The month after that, grant money to fund the program was cut. So after the DHS and the FBI acknowledged that this is a serious problem, they're like, acknowledged, we're cutting your funding, not even keeping it steady, which would itself be a dereliction of duty, the duty of the president and the federal government to protect the American people, but they actually cut the money. I mean, think about all the QAnon people and the conspiracy theories that they have. Think about all the conspiracy theories that we remember from back during the Obama years, how desperately those people could have hoped to come up with something like this to show that a president not only won't protect us, but in fact disarms those who aim to protect us. That would have been this graphic, that Parker Malloy tweet, if it was about Obama and if the year was 2015, that would have been burned into the screens of everyone watching Fox News because it would have been up for 9 months straight. But here, was that the biggest scandal yesterday when that came out? I don't even know, was it top 5? I'm not actually sure. And yet it is perhaps the clearest evidence that the Trump administration and the Republicans in general, the reason that they are in power, the main effect that comes from that is tax cuts first and foremost, and then after that, making sure that America cannot respond to the threats that we face. If it's threats to our democracy, our ability to have free and fair elections, they want to disarm us. They want to make sure that there's no reforms. If it's gun violence, they want to make sure that we're not even gonna get background checks out of this. So forget that idea, but we're certainly not gonna get an assault weapons ban or anything like that. So again, it's disarm, disarm, disarm. If every one of the experts is saying that domestic terrorism, that's the big threat, and the form it comes in is far-right white supremacist terrorism, then they disarm us. They disband those groups, they cut the funding. How is that not the dominant message throughout this presidential campaign? For every one of these people, many of them Republicans who vote based on their fears, their concerns about their safety, that the people they put into power are there to make sure that they are unsafe. And yet you don't hear talk about it. I barely saw that spread outside of Parker and a few others on Twitter. That was barely even mentioned. Complete dereliction of duty. Thank you for watching this clip from the Damage Report. For more content from the show and access to TYT Network members-only exclusives, go to tyt.com/Brooke. Wait, no, it's tyt.com/John. Go to tyt.com/John to sign up.